The New Orleans Saints aren't letting a lot of leaks out of the building, but they sure can't keep their names out of the rumor mill. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. On today's episode, we're rounding up some rumors around the New Orleans Saints. Derek Carr checked in with a pair of teams before the injury led to his retirement. What that tells us about the relationship between the New Orleans Saints and Derek Carr. The New Orleans Saints should not trade for Trey Hendrickson because spending money on nostalgia just doesn't make any sense at the NFL level. And we're going to lead everything off with Chris Olave, who again is centered around trade talks, but this time it's because the Pittsburgh Steelers might be interested. We got all that for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time, being here with us this time, making us your first listen, and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I want to get started with Chris Olave here. The reports coming out of Pittsburgh are that the Steelers might be interested in Chris Olave, but Chris Olave sounds like he's very much still a part of the New Orleans Saints plans, so I wouldn't get too worried about this just yet. Let me explain. This comes from some folks over at 93.7 The Fan over in Pittsburgh. One of the hosts there getting a text that simply says Chris Olave. That's it. That's the foundation for these rumors. It was a text that simply said Chris Olave. And so from that, it has now turned into or spiraled into and grown into this idea that the Pittsburgh Steelers are working on a trade for Chris Olave. So I'm going to walk that back a little bit. Not walk it back because I wasn't the one that said it, but I'm going to challenge that a little bit. I don't think that the Saints and the Pittsburgh Steelers are necessarily working on a trade right now. That feels a little bit deeper into what these conversations might be. But here's what I do think is probably true. The Pittsburgh Steelers are probably interested. The Pittsburgh Steelers probably want to know if he's available. Who could blame them? He's a talented young wide receiver that had 1,000 yards in each of his first two receiving seasons since entering the league back in 2022. Last year, unfortunately, his season got cut short after a scary hit in Week 9 up against the Carolina Panthers, sent him into concussion protocol for the second time on the season, and he never returned to the field, although he did return to the practice field toward the end of the year, which was a good sign and good news for New Orleans, no doubt about that. However, that is not what you're looking at if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. You're checking in on the New Orleans Saints, not because of Chris Olave or because of his injury history or because of anything having to do with him being on a rookie contract or anything. You're checking in about Chris Olave because A, you desperately need wide receiver help because you just traded away George Pickens. You've got DK Metcalf. I think DK Metcalf and Chris Olave would be an excellent pairing together in that offense. However, the reason why Pittsburgh is checking in with New Orleans is because New Orleans just lost their starting quarterback. At least everybody assumed he was going to be the starting quarterback going into 2025 in Derek Carr. And there's going to be an air of blood in the water when it comes to the New Orleans Saints for opposing teams and for teams around the NFL. And those teams around the NFL are going to be looking at a guy like Chris Olave, who's on the final year of his rookie deal. Yes, the Saints picked up his fifth-year option, but that fifth-year option isn't necessarily guaranteed. Isn't necessarily like tied to the Saints. The Saints could still trade him, and that fifth-year option just travels with him. And so they would be able to do that. He's a young player that's looking at and staring down the barrel of a potential second contract. The Saints don't have the greatest salary cap situation in the world, although it's about to get a lot better for them beginning next year, meaning that they would have the money to re-sign Chris Olave after his fifth-year option, which the Saints have not yet done anything. They can't restructure that or touch it or anything like that. That's $15.5 million for 2026. They'll worry about that when they get there. They don't have to worry about any of that right now. And a lot of teams are going to be looking at the New Orleans Saints, even though the New Orleans Saints are never going to admit it out loud. They're going to be looking at that team as a rebuilding team, as a team that might be looking to shed off some assets in order to bring in capital, and that capital being draft picks, which would allow them to be able to go and get some of those building blocks. But here's the thing. Chris Olave is barely, 25 years old. He's still a building block for this team already. And so if you're the New Orleans Saints, you're looking at a building block versus a potential building block, right? And so the Steelers would have to come with a lot in order to get the New Orleans Saints probably to move off of Chris Olave. I'm not saying it's impossible. Every player should have a price. And if that price makes sense for the organization, then you pull the trigger and you make that trade. We'll see how much this worked out for them, but the Saints did something like that last year with Marshawn Lattimore. They knew the situation they were in. They knew the situation Marshawn Lattimore was in. They knew the situation that Marshawn Lattimore wanted to be in, and they got a pretty good draft capital package back for him. If the Saints, and I think you would need more than that in order to get Chris Olave up out of New Orleans, personally. I think you're going to need a lot more than that to get Chris Olave out of New Orleans. I don't think it's a first-round pick, but I think it's a second-round pick and probably additional considerations as well. But that's just me speculating. The fact of the matter is that Kellen Moore has already kind of said that Chris Olave is a part of this team's future. He mentioned during the annual meeting in Palm Beach earlier this offseason, earlier this year, that Chris Olave has had a huge impact on this team, and he will have a huge impact, implying, again, for New Orleans. And so it sounds like the plan, at least, is for Chris Olave to be a part of the New Orleans Saints' future. And make no mistake about it, the Saints are going to have a young quarterback in 2025. They're going to have a first-time head coach. They're going to have all new schemes, all new systems, all new everything. But they're still going to try to compete in an NFC South division that has a reputation for being a weak division. And so you can't say that you're going to compete and trade away your top pass-catching option, your number one wide receiver. There's no other wide receiver right now that steps into the place of Chris Olave. You don't sign Brandon Cooks at the late stage twilight of his career and sign Donovan Peoples-Jones a year removed from the game, although there is a lot of excitement about what he might be able to bring. But you don't sign those guys so that you could trade away your one bona fide option in Chris Olave. Yes, you still have Rashid Shaheed, but Rashid Shaheed, I always say respect is gangsta, but he's not a number one guy. I don't know that Chris Olave is a number one guy either, but he's the team's number one option. And so finding a way to complement those receivers is going to be a way better way to compete than trading away either of those receivers in an attempt to build up potential draft capital that might turn into something in the future. And so I just don't see where the Saints have been so far this offseason and where it would be a situation where you would say, yeah, as a team, as the New Orleans Saints, where you would say, yeah, going to trade away Chris Olave. It just doesn't seem very likely. So here's what I think is actually happening. What I think is actually happening is simple. The Pittsburgh Steelers are interested in getting another wide receiver. They have some additional draft capital now after trading away George Pickens. There's an opportunity for them to potentially go and do that. But I don't know why you pass on George Pickens and then go and trade for Chris Olave if you pass on George Pickens for contractual reasons, because you're going to have to pay Chris Olave just as maybe you get a little bit more of a gap, but you're going to have to pay him $15.5 million and figure out a way to pay TJ Watt and figure out what you're going to do with DK Metcalf, all these other things, or figure out how to continue to manage what you've done with DK Metcalf, rather. And so it doesn't really even make a lot of sense from the Pittsburgh Steelers side of it to make a trade for a young wide receiver like this, knowing that you're going to have to commit $15.5 million to him next year when you're already struggling just to keep two wide receivers and an edge rusher on your roster in terms of payment and things like that. So I don't know that it's the smoothest move at all for Pittsburgh either. But I do know that you check, you call. When you have teams that look like they're rebuilding and might be shedding talent, you call and see what it would take to get that talent to your team. It's a responsible thing to do. It's what good organizations do. And if I'm the New Orleans Saints, I'm accepting very much Pittsburgh's phone call. I'm hearing them out. And then I'm probably saying no thank you. And then I'm moving on. That's kind of the way that I expect this to go. However, Kellen Moore and Mickey Loomis also said everything was good with Derek Carr, and then Derek Carr retired. So who knows? Who knows really? But it sounds like I would feel pretty comfortable, at least at this point, saying I'm not sure that anything is necessarily imminent when it comes to New Orleans Saints and the Pittsburgh Steelers, or when it comes to New Orleans Saints moving Chris Olave at all. We'll see how that changes, though, over the coming weeks, if at all. But my expectations on that changing are pretty low at this point. We'll see what new information comes out later. Coming up next, while the New Orleans Saints shouldn't be trading away Chris Olave, they also shouldn't be in a hurry to trade for Trey Hendrickson either. Let's get to that as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. The NFL schedule has officially been released. We now know all of the games for the New Orleans Saints, including their home opener and season opener up against the Arizona Cardinals. They're actually going to open with two home games, the Cardinals and the San Francisco 49ers back to back. So if you want to be in the Dome to see Kellen Moore, to see whoever the new starting quarterback is going to be, Tyler Shuck or Spencer Rattler, the new offense, the new defense, your opportunity to be there is waiting for you now over at Game Time. Head over to Game Time today. You can download the Game Time app. You can grab tickets there and you can turn in all-in pricing. That way you're not taken by surprise when it comes to any fees by the end. They just really take all of the ticket buying experience and make it super, super transparent. So go and grab your tickets today. Or if you want to wait, you can get up to 60% off sometimes by waiting until the last minute. But download the Game Time app today and create an account and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You're going to get $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, family. While the New Orleans Saints shouldn't be trading Chris Olave away, they shouldn't be trading for Trey Hendrickson either. I think this is probably an unpopular opinion of mine, and that's okay. But I do think that all of the trade rumors around Trey Hendrickson, he becomes one of the team or one of the pieces, one of the players that I get the most questions about. Ross, do you think that the Saints should trade for Trey Hendrickson? And my genuine, honest, authentic answer is no. I don't think that they should. Let me explain to you why. First of all, I think nostalgia is fun. And I think that it's true that the New Orleans Saints made the wrong decision by saddling up with Marcus Davenport as opposed to paying and keeping Trey Hendrickson. The reason why the Saints didn't keep Trey Hendrickson is because of the fact they didn't have a role for him. They wanted him to be their third defensive end behind guys like Cam Jordan and Marcus Davenport. The reason why the reason why New Orleans didn't have a role for Trey Hendrickson is because they made the wrong decision in keeping Marcus Davenport ahead of him on the depth chart and wanting to hope that everything with their first round pick that they invested a pair of first round picks in and additional draft capital, they wanted Marcus Davenport to work. And he didn't. He was never going to, it looked like. And he hasn't in any of his other stops. It's not working out. And so the Saints made the wrong decision. There's no doubt about that. But you can't, if you're the New Orleans Saints trying to turn the page to your future, no more Derek Carr, no more Dennis Allen, no more Sean Payton, no more Drew Brees. So much of that 2017 draft class is about to be off the books. You've got one player left from that class after Ryan Ramczyk's retirement processes post June 1, and that's going to be running back Alvin Kamara. You are effectively turning the page. Several of your aging veterans on your roster have their contracts set to void next season. You have a new head coach, an entirely new defensive staff, an entirely new, almost new offensive staff, and you're about ready to flip your roster next season. So going out there now and trying to right the wrongs of the past is a step in the wrong direction. The New Orleans Saints need not be concerned about their past any longer. Just like they don't need to be concerned with trying to rekindle the success of the past. Just like they no longer need to be connected to trying to sustain the success of the past. It's the thing that's got them in trouble over the course of the past 3 years, trying to extend the Sean Payton days with guys like Dennis Allen and Pete Carmichael. It was never going to work. And it didn't work. Now, the idea of going back and trying to Malcolm Jenkins your way through a situation with Trey Hendrickson, which is going to cost you draft capital and is going to cost you a lot of money when you're just about ready to step into financial freedom for the first time, not a great move, in my opinion, for the New Orleans. A couple years ago, Trey Hendrickson signed a 4-year, $60 million contract with the Cincinnati Bengals. He's now on a 1-year, $21 million deal right now with them on a contract that he says that he will not play on, whether that's with Cincinnati or elsewhere. He wants a new contract. He is also over 30 years old. The New Orleans Saints just got burned big time and should be snakebit from signing a free agent over the age of 30 for too much money at a premier position that unfortunately changed the course of what this organization had the ability to do over the course of the past 2 seasons. And that was the signing of Derek Carr. And because of that, the New Orleans Saints are now hampered for an extra year here in 2025 and then are about to step into, on the cusp of that financial freedom that they've been looking for quite some time going into 2026. Don't ruin it by spending and funneling in another massive contract for another player over 30 years old at a premium position that might not work out for you. Trey Hendrickson is going to cost money. 4 years, $60 million in that last contract that he signed. He's coming off of 2 back-to-back 17.5 sack seasons. And while it would be great for the New Orleans Saints to go out there and get a nice little hometown discount on him, send some trade capital, get him here to New Orleans, and then work out a friendly deal for him, and then get 17.5 sacks for another few seasons, that's probably unlikely to happen. There's a chance that Trey Hendrickson never has another 10-sack season in his career. And you can't let that happen in a New Orleans Saints uniform if you're the New Orleans Saints. You funneled so many resources in with the idea of bringing in Chase Young, re-signing Chase Young, flipping your defensive coaching staff, bringing in Bo Davis, bringing in an edges coach and Jay Rodgers to come in to help out with the pass rush, all these other pieces. Don't stand in your own way by going out there and spending a ton of money on a player that doesn't have an upward trajectory from this point forward. The Cincinnati Bengals are simply trying to be a year early at this point. It's why they're not trying to re-sign him. It's why the talks have been disappointing in Cincinnati. Take that and heed that for the New Orleans Saints. You're not in a situation to where you're an edge rusher away. And you're not going to be in a situation to where you're an edge rusher away in the next 2 or 3 years. There's no sense in doing this. The only reason why you would do it and trade for Trey Hendrickson is because you're trying to right the wrongs of the past. And the Saints need to let go of their past immediately and as quickly and as swiftly and as abruptly as possible. And making a trade for a guy like Trey Hendrickson and trying to forgive themselves or exonerate themselves for making the wrong decision, which they absolutely did by not keeping Trey Hendrickson, and they doubled up that wrong decision by doubling down on Marcus Davenport of all players. You can't let that be the reason why you're making decisions for your organization. You can't let that be the thing. And so for New Orleans, the best thing that they could do is steer clear of Trey Hendrickson trade talk. That is my genuine feel. It has nothing to do with Trey Hendrickson being a good guy or a bad guy or a good player or a bad player. It has everything to do with the Saints, A, not being a pass rusher away, B, on the brink of financial freedom, hindering themselves and tying themselves to an aging player again, and C, putting themselves in a situation where the only foundational building blocks that they should be concerned about right now are those draft picks. And I get it. The New Orleans Saints are just like every other team around the NFL are hit or miss with draft picks. But trading to bring in a 30-plus-year-old edge rusher that might not be able to contribute for you and might not even fit your defense at this point, now that you've changed over your defensive scheme, it's going to hinder your ability to go out there and specifically go and get the players that do fit that defensive scheme. You specifically go out there and do get those players that fit your offensive scheme, right? You're trading away draft capital. You're giving up selections on both sides of the football, every element of the game. And so I don't think that this would be a good reason or a good move by the New Orleans Saints. I get it. I completely get the nostalgia of it all. That Trey Hendrickson was a guy that should have remained here in New Orleans, should have been given the opportunity to stay here, should have had a bigger role that would have kept him here. Wasn't given that role. The Saints made the wrong choice. But going out there and paying for nostalgia as an NFL team is not going to progress their situation, which is a situation that is still very much in need of those assets that you would have to give up money-wise, monetarily, as well as draft pick-wise in order to get him here to New Orleans. Just cut the loss. You were wrong on Trey Hendrickson. You were wrong on Marcus Davenport, and there's nothing you can do to change that or rewrite that script. It's unfortunate, but that's what it is. Now focus on the guys that are in your building. Coming up next, speaking of guys that are in the building, Derek Carr looked like he was doing everything he could to potentially get out of the building even before his injury forced him into retirement. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints just cannot stay out of the rumor mill here over the course of this offseason. We thought maybe things would slow around for them after the retirement of Derek Carr, but after some new reports have recently come out, it sounds like the New Orleans Saints actually were close to parting ways with Derek Carr one way or another. Some great reporting over at ESPN from Jeremy Fowler as well as Catherine Terrell, good friend, who pulled together this story around kind of all the details about where things happened, what happened with Derek Carr, what was going on, all those other things. And one thing in particular really stood out to me. And here's the quote. I'll read the quote directly. A Carr representative spoke with at least 2 teams in the market for a quarterback about potential interest in the veteran, according to 3 league sources. While one of those sources classified that the contact was indirect, both front offices were made aware that Carr might be looking for a new playing home. So I want to highlight a couple of things about what this means. This is a Carr representative checking in with other teams. This is not a problem. This is not a bad thing. This isn't tampering. This isn't something that's like that you can penalize or anything like that. This is a Carr representative checking in on interests from other teams. About the potential interest in the veteran, right? Hey, if Derek Carr were to become available, is that a player that you'd be interested in? Is that a player that you would want to speak to? Like, would you want to talk to him? All these other things. Not, hey, you want to sign Derek Carr? Like, very, very different type of situation here, right? But it's about checking and working the market to figure out, hey, if my client or whoever it is that I'm representing becomes available, is there a potential landing spot for that player? Now, there was never any formal conversation around a trade for Derek Carr or a formal conversation around trying to get ahead and work out the parameters of a deal in case he did become available. Doesn't sound like it went that far, which is fine. Again, that means that everything is above board in terms of what these conversations were. But it does further what it is that we've talked about on the show a lot, that the injury is only part of the equation. There's also it's very clear that Derek Carr was interested in going elsewhere part of the equation for the New Orleans Saints and for Derek Carr. And so that to me is a very important piece to this puzzle. And it's one that still remains widely unanswered in terms of what would have happened, all these other things. But I do think very much that what this solidifies, or continues to solidify rather, is that there were two sides of this coin. And it doesn't sound like the Saints and Derek Carr were ever moving in a direction to where they were truly going to be together in 2025. I can't find a single stitch of information that tells you that. I mean, yes, Mickey Loomis said, oh, Derek's the starting quarterback, and Derek Carr said nothing's wrong and all these other things. I think that has a lot more to do with public-facing conversation and how that impacts some of the stuff that was going on behind closed doors than it actually has to do with a true indication that everything was just fine and dandy between these two. And so I'm going to speculate now moving forward, right? So what I told you before is stuff that's been reported, that we've heard, all this other stuff. Now let me speculate with you for a moment. Here's what I think that this means in terms of, because I think that this is relevant to Derek Carr giving $30 million back. I got the opportunity to work with Derek Carr. I got the opportunity to speak with him and everything like that. He is definitely a nice guy. Is he $30 million nice? I don't think anyone in the world is. I don't think anybody's $30 million nice. And so him turning around and giving back $30 million, walking away with the $10 million roster bonus and the $28+ million that had already been given to him in a signing bonus at the beginning of his contract, that kind of stuff, or in 2023 with the beginning of the contract and then maybe some restructures, things like that. Those kinds of things happen sometimes in the NFL. It's where it's like, okay, well, you walk away with that, you give us this back. But $30 million always kind of felt like a lot. And so what I think that this means is that the Saints were clearly heading towards a point to where things were going to happen in terms of a split between Derek Carr and the New Orleans Saints. How it was going to happen and what was going to happen and how they were going to get it all worked out. Those details were the parts that we didn't know. But it was very clear that the split was coming. And that split could have been ahead of 2025. It could have been Derek Carr getting surgery and then going on injured reserve for the entire season. And then that split happening in 2026, or him rehabbing the entire season and then the split happening in 2026. But this to me feels like something else happened. Something else went wrong. Derek Carr was looking at opportunities to go elsewhere. Derek Carr would not take a pay cut. Derek Carr got restructured. Reports immediately were that he wasn't happy with the idea of being restructured because it meant that he was tied to the Saints. Derek Carr never showed up in New Orleans to speak with Kellen Moore. The two never spoke, according to Kellen Moore himself. He showed up in New Orleans a few times for medical checks, but during that time, never spoke with Kellen Moore, never met with Kellen Moore face to face. And so you add all of that together, and then you add on top of that as well that like once the season was over, he picked up and he moved his family all back out to Fresno and all back out to the Central Valley, California. So either Derek Carr was very aware of the idea that he wanted to retire at that point, and that retirement made sense for him pretty early on when it came to the injuries that he suffered over the season, but then also wanted to keep everything open, right? Could return to the Saints, although very unlikely. I'll retire, or if I do come back, let me see where I could go if I do decide to play again, right? And so a big part of that probably would have come down to whether or not it was going to be if the rehab was going to work on the shoulder, or whether or not the whether or not there was going to have to require surgery. Requiring surgery is probably what pushed him to retiring and saying, no, I don't want to do the surgery thing. I just want to live my life. Like Drew Brees talks about this all the time. Drew Brees is left-handed now because he wants to be able to throw a football with his kids, but he can't with his right arm and everything. And so he throws left-handed and everything. Like he's talked about that publicly. And so like I could see Derek Carr having some kind of similar situations where it's like, he's got kids. He wants to be able to play, wants to be able to throw football, all this other stuff. And so going out there and getting surgery again and beating up the arm some more and all of this stuff probably wouldn't have worked out for him. So I think that those things linger. I think the other thing that I'm still very curious about is the timing of the shoulder injury. What happened? Because a part of this report from Jeremy Fowler and Catherine Terrell suggests that says that there was indeed a physical done at the end of the season. And at the time of that physical, that there was no indication of a shoulder injury or any mention of a shoulder injury by Derek Carr. And so that makes me wonder, was that shoulder injury there? If so, why didn't he disclose it? Or did the shoulder injury happen somewhere else? I'm continuing to speculate here. In either one of those cases, either if the shoulder injury wasn't disclosed, or if the shoulder injury happened on the ski trip that he went to, if the shoulder injury happened at a different point, then you would probably be in line for litigation with the team at that point, who are going to be trying to get some of that guaranteed money back. And so instead of going through all of that process, one of the quotes in this story says that integrity is important to Derek Carr. And so instead of going through that process and going through litigation and getting that money taken back, maybe just making the decision to say, let me just ease the money back to you instead, and we can split up amicably. I'll retire. I'm heading out anyway, kind of thing. It makes sense. It makes sense. I'm not saying that that's what happened. Doug Mouton and I over in the Ultimate New Orleans Sports Show, we discussed this as well. Like maybe there was something litigious here and they just wanted to avoid all of it. And Derek Carr said, yeah, my integrity is really important to me. I don't want to do the litigation thing. Here's the $30 million back. Couldn't get with other teams. Ended up having the shoulder injury. It was worse than maybe they expected. He couldn't rehab it. Didn't want to get the surgery. Retired. Gave the money back. No litigation. Everything's amicable. We'll see. It's one of those things that certainly makes a lot of sense. But what we now know for sure is that there were at least two teams. I imagine the Giants, the Browns, the Colts, maybe the Titans were were amongst those pair of teams. We'll see. Maybe that information will come out later, but it seems like that was the case for Derek Carr and the New Orleans Saints. So that continues to be an interesting story as more and more details continue to come out. All right, y'all, coming up the next time that I see you, we'll take a look at what's going on with the New Orleans Saints coming off of their schedule release, and of course, continue to take a look at this, or get started taking a look at this roster ahead of OTAs, which kick off on the 20th. I'll see you on Monday. Going to take the weekend here. And I want to give a quick belated birthday shout out to my guy, brother Jer. Happy birthday, homie. Hope it was a good one. Appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a party day part of your routine, saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. Trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.